لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. ربي زدنا علما وربنا فقهنا في الدين. قولوا آمين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر ولله عاقبة الأمور. صدق الله العظيم. How's everybody doing? Alhamdulillah. All right. I hope midterms are going well, and inshallah, first of all, welcome to I think the first session close enough to Ramadan. So Ramadan Mubarak, Ramadan Kareem alayna, Ramadan Mubarak alayna wa alaykum inshallah. May Allah make it a blessed month for all of us, and may Allah make it a month full of blessings. اللهم تمم لنا رمضان بإذن الله واجعله شهرا مباركا لنا وعلينا وعلى المسلمين جميعا بإذن الله في كل مكان. It's good to remember that it's a blessed month on every Muslim all over the world. Some fortunate enough to be around their friends, their families, but unfortunately not everybody is fortunate enough to be around those that they love. Unfortunately, not all Muslims are able to find iftar during Maghrib. Not everybody is going to be able to fast, in a safe place, especially to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. So it's good before we start that we remember them, that we remember to keep them in our du'as, inshallah. May Allah help them, may Allah preserve them, may Allah make it a blessed month, not just on us, but on them specifically, inshallah. That in mind, inshallah, we're going to begin with the second half of the second half. In general, if you look at any of the books of Seerah, or any of the books of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll find that they're always broken into, three thirds. The first part, or the first third, is the entire Meccan period from start to end. And then the second one, or the second third, is always broken down from the time that the Prophet comes to Medina, so the Hijrah, all the way until Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, which we talked about last time. After that, they get into the third, or the second half of the Median period. And the reason is because Sulh al-Hudaybiyah showed a changing point. It signaled a turning point, and that was because everything before then, the Muslims were in a relatively weak state, and everything was basically just localized to them. They were fighting within the Arab tribes, they were trying to set things up between each other, and they were getting fought from every tribe all around them. Most of them trying to come into their city, from the Battle of the Trench to Uhud. Sometimes they would try to go outside, such as Badr. But for the most part, it was just wars on top of wars on top of wars, and the Muslims just trying to deal within themselves. And even the Prophet said in Uhud, the people, while he was praying, he said, there is no person on the face of this earth that worships Allah other than the people in the city. So, what happened after Sulh al-Hudaybiyah? Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, as we mentioned, signals a changing point. So, the reason is because when we look at Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, we talked about how it was a treaty, not an allegiance, because a lot of people confuse those, but it was a treaty between the Muslims and Quraysh. And keep in mind, Quraysh, being the tribe that they are, had a lot of influence all over. Being the tribe that protects the Kaaba, that has the Kaaba in it, being the tribe that has the most wealth. Again, Quraysh comes from the word qirsh, which is the currency. So they're one of the richest, if not the richest tribe. And in general, people liked Quraysh, people wanted to keep a good deal with Quraysh. People wanted to keep, a good relationship with Quraysh. So when it came to the Muslims, they really didn't like them, more or less. But after the treaty, now more tribes are like, all right, now that there's a treaty between them, now we can actually deal with the Muslims. So people started trading with the Muslims, which meant that, now the religion is being influenced in other places just through trade, through the traders. And people started asking themselves, all right, Okay, we've been fighting them, but why have we been fighting? Like, okay, I'm fighting Muhammad, but but who is Muhammad? Let's figure out who he is. What is he preaching? And people actually started to sit down and internalize the message, from all over the Arab Peninsula. And we'll talk about how it didn't just spread across the Arab Peninsula, but it spread across the world as a whole. And then it also gave the Muslims breathing space to actually deal with some of the other tribes that don't have any allegiances or any treaties with Quraysh, who had previously fought them, especially in the Battle of the Trench or between the Confederates. And last but not least, through all of this spreading, through the trade, whether it's through the message spreading, whether it's through the wars that they had, a lot of people started being influenced by the message, which meant that there were a lot more Muslims coming in. Some much more impactful than others. But let's start off with the conquests, because the first thing that the Muslims did, one of the first things that the Muslims did after the treaty, is that they wanted to ensure that the Arab tribes all around, who had no treaties with Quraysh and had previously fought them, understood that, okay, the Muslims are no longer a force to be meddled with, and that anything that you have done before to basically mess with us is going to come back to you. And there's a lot of battles and there's a lot of conquests that happened here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's one main one that we need to cover. Khaybar. Actually, I've mentioned Khaybar before. What's Khaybar? Come on. Yeah. What's special about that area? That's not where they built. They built the trench in Medina. But who went to Khaybar? The Jews. That was their main gathering point. When all of them left, Khaybar is an area right now. It's actually popular because of how isolated it is in Saudi right now. But Khaybar it's a mountainous area, which meant that the Jews were able to go to that area and build a lot of forts. Again, I've always said this whenever we talk about the Jews with the Prophet ﷺ, we always mention the word fort. But they took that area as their new home, and they built a bunch of forts there, and that was the area where they began gathering the different confederates. So after Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, now the Prophet wanted to go and deal with the Jews in Khaybar. Now here's something special. During that, the Jews were always the richest people around. So when the Muslims knew that they were going to go to Khaybar, they knew that whatever they're going to get out of it, it's going to be a lot. They're going to be getting land, they're going to be getting gold, money, anything you can imagine in terms of wealth, they're going to get at Khaybar. Now, here the Prophet ﷺ, he put a condition. He said the only people who are coming to Khaybar are those who made the pledge under the tree. Remember the Muslims who were at Hudaybiyah, and when the Muslims saw that Uthman was killed, they all made a pledge to the Prophet to die right there and to fight for the Prophet. He said those are the only people who can come to Khaybar. Obviously, especially al-Munafiqeen, they really wanted to go. Whatever they get out of this place, it's going to be way more than we can imagine. And the Prophet was already promised that he's going to open Khaybar. He's going to conquest Khaybar. So here the Munafiqeen are like, Ya Rasulullah, we want to die for the sake of Allah. We want the shahada. Like we want to die for the sake of Allah. We want to fight for the sake of Allah. The Prophet's like, all right, no, that's fair. I can't take that away from you. Whoever wants to come to Khaybar, outside of the people who have already made the pledge, whoever outside of those people wants to come and fight for the sake of Allah, but without getting any bounty, you're more than welcome to come. Not a single man came. And it just shows you the balance when it comes to fighting for the sake of Allah and gaining this worldly gains, right? Because some of us bring out the first, but in reality we mask it because we actually want the second. You'll always say, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your intention. And subhanAllah, when the environment changes, all around you, your intention shows, because if you're trying to do something and you're doing it for the sake of Allah, if the environment changes, khalas, you're still continuing on that path. But if you're masking something or something that you're intending for, because it's for the sake of Allah, once the environment changes, and once it actually starts becoming difficult, or once there's a condition that you didn't know about, that's where it's actually exposed. That's where the blankets come off and your actual intention is exposed. So here the Muslims, they gathered an army of, again, it was 1,400 men. So the 1,400 men, they headed towards Khaybar. And Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, being the munafiq that he is, exposed that plan to the Jews in Khaybar. So they all began defending the fort. In Khaybar, there were 5 forts. Keep in mind, we've talked about Banu Nadir, Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Qurayza, and the forts that they had in Medina. Those alone took days to break. Imagine what it was in Khaybar. And keep in mind, the Muslims were going into Khaybar and they had power, but they were poor. And they still didn't gain a lot of money. They were still relatively poor. So once they reached Khaybar, they realized that they had to take each fort one by one. There's no other way of going about this. So while they were going, Ghatafan, which was the biggest tribe that had come to from the Confederates to Medina during the Battle of the Trench, they had an allegiance with the Jews. So they came, but here the leader of Ghatafan, he was a bit mischievous. So he had one of 2 options. He could either help the Jews and gain things off of them, or he could help the Muslims take over whatever the Jews have. So while he was negotiating with the Prophet told him, I'm willing, if you leave us, we're going to give you half of Medina's dates, and you can do whatever you want with it. He's like, no, I want almost all of what you're going to get out of Khaybar. The Prophet's like, no, you can do whatever you want outside of that. So now Ghatafan's army is coming to help the Jews now, because they actually, if they help them, they might gain something off of it. And then subhanAllah, again, this is where you realize that you can't control anything. Ghatafan's army all went back to their city, and that was because while they were going, a man, all of a sudden, they just heard a man pass by with a horse, and he said, come protect your children and your women. Basically saying that Ghatafan is under attack. Once the army heard that, the entire 4,000 man army went back to Ghatafan. Now, who called this? Who made that announcement? Why did he make that announcement? Because when they got there, they realized nothing happened. And by the time they came back to Khaybar was already, half of it was conquered already. So, who made that announcement? Why did he make it? Allah. To this day, nobody knows. Even the Prophet ﷺ doesn't know. Allahu. And once they got to Khaybar, they had, it's a long story, I'm not going to go into too many of the details, but all you need to know is that it was a tough battle, but the Muslims were able to take each fort one by one. And after they took on each fort, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made things much more easier for them one by one. So for instance, the very first fort that they got to, basically what happened is that the Muslims, they came, and actually the Prophet did something. He came and he said, I'll give you one of 3 options. Either you convert, embrace Islam. Even in these cases, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet always tries to do da'wah. So either convert, or you pay jizya, which is basically a tax for us protecting you. Or war, which by the way is still, as far as we know, the 3 things that we give to armies that we fight. Either they convert, or they pay us tax, or we fight them. Now, when the Prophet gave them these options, they went into their fort, they said we'll consult, and then they went in, and then they gathered their entire army and they went out to fight the Muslims. It's kind of weird, but anyways. Now, once the Jews began fighting them, they realized that the power is much, and again, this is all of Khaybar is a gathered 10,000 Jewish army. But here's something that we realize about the Jews is that they generally don't fight together. Each tribe or each section has their own fort, and each one's trying to protect their own fort and trying to protect their own walls. So they don't have a combined army. And even one of them tried to combine their armies so they can fight together, but they wouldn't budge. And the Muslims, they broke siege after siege. And in one of these sieges, an interesting story that happened is that the Prophet ﷺ, he came and he said, tomorrow, I'm gonna give the flag that we generally carry to move the army to a man that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger love, and a man and he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger. Now, all of the Sahaba, they're excited. They want that to be them. So the next day comes and all of them are gathered around the Prophet. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, where's Ali? Ali ibn Abi Talib. And then they say, he's sick. Apparently he had an irritation in his eye and he couldn't see. So the Prophet went to him and he asked him, what's wrong with you? He's like, my eyes are irritated. I can't even see in front of me. So here the Prophet ﷺ, he brushed his eyes, he prayed for him, it's cured. Miracle out of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But after Ali took the flag and he was able to open one of the forts, he opened that fort, and in that fort they actually started finding new equipment. They found catapults and they found siege towers that apparently the Jews were trying to gather and they were trying to set up so they can actually use it against the Prophet later on. Subhanallah. You build something to fight Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses it against you. And now for the rest of the siege, now the Muslims, they're using equipment which they've never used before, because keep in mind, catapults and siege towers, they're heavy. In a desert, like again, if you're fighting forts and you're fighting empires, yes, you might want to use them because again, you have high walls and you have cities that are just in place, but in the middle of the desert, it's kind of hard to move such a heavy object through sand and through long distances. So generally, they didn't know how to use them, but they were figuring it out. And they're taking fort after fort. And alhamdulillah, they were able to take all of them. One notable story here that I think is worth mentioning is that in one of the forts that they took, is that they found a lot of food and they found a lot of items that they were able to use. But one of these things, they found a bunch of barrels of wine. Now obviously they can't drink it, so by that time alcohol was prohibited. So they started breaking them, and all the alcohol was pouring on the floor. Now one of the companions of the Prophet, he saw this, and before it was prohibited, he was addicted. He loved drinking alcohol. But after it was prohibited, he started rehabilitating. He started leaving it. But as he saw it just pouring on the floor, his addiction started to kick in again, and he started drinking. Now they brought him to the Prophet ﷺ, and they told him what he did. The Prophet took his sandal and he bonked him on the head. And then he told all of the Sahaba to each one of you, give him one hit on the head. Now while this was happening, Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he came to him, he cursed him out. He's like, La'anak Allah. And then here the Prophet got mad at him and he said, don't say that. Yes, he sinned, but this is a man who loves Allah and His Messenger. Sin is unrelated to belief. You could believe in something, but you could sin. Now granted, that doesn't mean your sin doesn't have consequences, as we just saw. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that there are people out there that love Him, even if they're doing bad by Him. Loving Allah is the gateway that we use to avoid sin. It's not the opposite way. Just because you're avoiding sin doesn't mean that this is how you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a way of expressing it. But you could love Allah and His Messenger but still sin. And I think we've all fallen into that at one point. Some more severe than others, but it's fine for you to see somebody sinning. It's normal. But your goal is not to curse that person out or to push your goal is to help them. And to understand, because again, this man, he sinned because he was again, bring it into context, he's an addict. And if it wasn't for the fact that he was in the fort, he probably wouldn't have done what he did. And at the end of the day, he does love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. And you can't read that. And as they took all of these forts, and they started, by the end of it, the Jews, they decided to make a treaty with the Muslims. And here the Prophet ﷺ, he said, we'll take your land. Khaybar is ours. Any of the other places, specifically Fadak and Wadi al-Qura, which are right here, they're ours. And you guys leave the land. But here the Jews, they came and they're like, alright, land is yours, but we'll give you a better proposition. You don't know how to manage this land. You don't know how to use this land. So we'll give you the land, but bring us here as workers, as people who live off the land and people who work for the land, and in exchange we'll get half of Medina stakes. And the Prophet agreed to this. Again, our issue with the Jews is not their religion. If it was, the Prophet wouldn't have agreed to this in the first place. Our issue with them is the action that they commit, or the things that they do against our religion. And that doesn't fall on Jews alone, that falls on any single person. And a few other things that the Prophet, part of the people that they took was somebody called Safiya bint Huyay. And she was given to the Prophet, and the Prophet, he freed her, and once he freed her, she said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The Prophet was confused. And Safiya, we've already mentioned this story, but we've mentioned how she was in Medina when the Prophet came, and she was young, and she saw how her father and uncles had acknowledged that the Prophet was actually a prophet. And ever since then, she's been seeing dreams, and she's acknowledged that he is a prophet, just based off of everything. And she's accepted that he's a prophet. And the Prophet was so happy that he even married her, alhamdulillah. And Safiya, and an interesting thing is Safiya, according to according to narrations, is that she was very beautiful. So that made the other wives of the Prophet very envious of her. So whenever they would call her, they would say the daughter of the Jew. And this annoyed her, and she was made sad by it, and she would go to the Prophet and she would complain. Then the Prophet smiled and he said, why are you mad at that? You're from the descendants of Harun, because that's where she's from the descendants of Harun. Your father is a messenger, Harun. Your uncle is a messenger, which is Musa, and your husband's a messenger. So say that. Say, my father is a messenger, my uncle is a messenger, and my husband's a messenger. And this comes back, and again, when it comes to Jewish lineage, that's not something, any form of lineage, that's not something we hold against people. Somebody's making fun of you because of your skin color, or because of your race, because of where you're from. Your culture has a lot of rich things. Be proud of them. Find a way to turn whatever negatives the society around you tries to convey against you into positives. And wallah, your life's going to be made a lot easier. And the Muslims, they took a lot of wealth out of Khaybar. And subhanAllah, the Prophet, Aisha said that we were always hungry until we finally captured Khaybar. And similar to how the Prophet ﷺ had captured and had taken Khaybar, may Allah allow us as Muslims also to, inshallah, take back the land that is ours, inshallah, in Palestine. May Allah free it from the hands of the Zionists, bi'idhnillah. Now, after that, and after a year after Hudaybiyah, remember one of the points of the treaty is that the Muslims could come a year later for Umrah. They'll come a year later, and the Muslims now are preparing for Umrah, because that's what they agreed on. But the Prophet, he was worried that Quraysh might not honor their agreement. So what he did is he brought an army with him, and he brought weapons with him. And while they were marching, even Quraysh knew this, so they're like, what, are you breaking our treaty now? He's like, no, we're leaving everything at the borders of Mecca. So as the Prophet went in, he left their weapons with a group of people at the borders of Mecca, and the rest of the Muslims went in. And they went in a massive group, and it was kind of like an army walking in, but with for doing Umrah. Now Quraysh, they really didn't want people seeing the strength of the Muslims. They really didn't want people being exposed to them. So they even ordered everybody in Mecca for that day to just leave the city. So as the Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ were entering Mecca, and Quraysh saw them, Abu Sufyan, he's like, these people, they're sick. They have a disease, that's why we're leaving, and that's why we're leaving them. When the Prophet heard this rumor, he told them, no, we're going to show them. So what he did is he told them with the ihram, again, which is like the white cloth that we wear, take it, expose your right shoulder, flip it around yourself, so people would be able to see how, like your shoulder, and shoulders are generally, when you train and you're relatively strong, your shoulders are going to begin popping out, they're going to begin like building muscle. So it's a sign of power. And again, if you are sick, your skin will show that you have, it'll show on your skin. So showing your shoulder also shows that you're not, showing your skin shows that you're not sick. So he said do that, and he said while we're doing tawaf, move quick. And don't run, but move in a quick manner. And then when the people of Quraysh saw this, there's no way these people are sick. And as they're walking around, لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك إن الحمد والنعمة لك والملك لا شريك لك. And this exposed to Quraysh the power that the Muslims have now gained since their last battle. But coming back to Quraysh, once they saw this, they're like, alright, some of them didn't know that there were weapons being held outside of the border. And some of them had actually considered fighting the Muslims, which was immediately shut down after the Prophet had exposed that they actually have weapons. And while the Prophet was leaving, he did something interesting. So, the Prophet, he had met one of Khalid ibn al-Walid's relatives. And when he met him, he came to him and he said, where's Khalid? I want him to know that somebody as smart as him can't deny the message of Islam. Somebody as smart as him should understand that this is the truth. And something to note about Khalid ibn Walid and Amr ibn al-As too, and even Uthman ibn Talha, is that these three men were young. Now keep in mind, Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl, the chiefs of Quraysh that were killed in Badr, when the Prophet came, the Prophet was young. Again, I've compared this before, but it's kind of like when you're in like a family gathering and you try to say something, but like everybody in your family kind of just, puts you on the sidelines because you're like young. But here, Khalid ibn Walid, he's young, so there's nobody above him now. His father, Walid ibn al-Mughira, is no longer alive. There's nobody higher than him in power to tell him how to think. Same thing with Amr ibn al-As. So they basically had the opportunity to kind of think for themselves. Amr ibn al-As went to the Negus. If you remember, he also went before when the Muslims had went to Al-Habasha. So he went back to Al-Habasha and he met with the Negus, who we mentioned before he had converted. And the Negus talked with him. And he convinced him that this is the true religion. The Prophet that's with you, that you've been fighting, is a true Prophet. And at that point, Amr ibn al-As had been convinced. Khalid ibn al-Walid, he had received the message and it resonated with him, but Najashi. And Khalid ibn al-Walid, he had thought about it, and while he was leaving the city, he had met Amr ibn al-As, who asked him and he asked him, like, what are you doing? And Amr ibn al-As told him that I'm going to Medina. Why? And then he explained everything to him. At this point, Khalid ibn al-Walid was convinced. And then while they were going, they met Uthman ibn Talha, who was also going to Medina. All three separate, okay. And keep in mind, Amr ibn al-As is, he's the smart, actually the term is, he's the most cunning of the Arabs, the Hayat al-Arab. Khalid ibn al-Walid is the chief general of all of Medina. He's basically their primary cavalry leader. And Uthman ibn Talha, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, I'll have to double check, but he had the keys to the Kaaba. Or his family had the keys to the Kaaba. We're talking about three of the biggest men in all of Medina, in all of Mecca. And then all three of them went and they began walking towards Medina. And when the Prophet saw them coming in, he was happy and he said, the chiefs of Medina are now coming to your side. When Amr ibn al-As came to, again, all three of them, they went to the Prophet independently to give him their shahada, to give him their pledge and to give him the shahada. So when Amr ibn al-As came, he said, I'm only going to pledge to you on one condition. Now at this point, the Prophet could say there's no condition. You either become a Muslim or you don't. But here, the Prophet asked him, what's your condition? Because he knows Amr ibn al-As. And then Amr ibn al-As says, I'll convert on the condition that you forgive all of the sins that I've done in the past. Because I have messed with the Muslims more than you can imagine. Amr ibn al-As was deadly. And he had caused the Muslims a lot of pain. So he said it himself, when I was in the city, I was embarrassed because of all of the pain that I've caused a lot of these people. But then the Prophet laughed and he said, do you not know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just forgive your sins, but He turns all of them into good deeds? And then Khalid ibn Walid, when he came, he was dressed in a lot of things and he started taking off all the jewelry or anything precious that he was wearing, just out of shyness being in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And this just shows you that when you're in a state of relative peace, when you're in a community which isn't fighting with each other, which isn't in discourse, you're able to actually spread the message more effectively. You're actually able to sit down, be like, all right, here's what this message is about. And you're able to actually do da'wah more effectively. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Prophet has said, خَيْرُكُمْ فِي الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ خَيْرُكُمْ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ. The best of you during your time of ignorance is the best of you in Islam. We don't, when you look at people, again, Khalid ibn Walid had killed around, 300 Muslims during Uhud? These aren't small numbers. If I tell you right now, do you want Trump to convert to Islam, for instance, just out of complete curiosity, would you say yes or no? Again, yes, he's done a lot of harm, but do you consider him a relatively cunning or smart or tactical man that you would want on your side? Again, we don't want enemies. We want people to join our religion. And then the Prophet, he had spread the message to the Arabs, and he had spread it to the people of Medina, and that's mainly where everything had lied. But what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Not to the Arabs, to the entire world. Which means that this message it's It's not a message for the Arabs, or it's not a message for the people of Medina or the people of Mecca, or. It's a message for the entire world, which meant that the Prophet ﷺ had to start telling the empires of the world that we had spoken about in like the very first lesson about this message. Now, for the last, I don't know how many, we've only been talking about the Arabs and what's been happening, but now let's start talking about what's been actually happening all over the world so far. And we'll explore this as we go through the 8 messengers that the Prophet had sent to the different areas. So the Prophet, he sent a messenger to Abyssinia. I've seen 2 different like opinions on this. So either that the king of Abyssinia is the same Najashi or Negus that was there when the Muslims had went, and others say he was a new one. Wallahu alam. The Prophet had sent a messenger to the kingdom of Bahrain, which is in modern day like Bahrain and like West Saudi Arabia, like where the oil is. That's where they were. The Prophet had sent a messenger to Al-Madain or Persia. The Prophet had sent a messenger to Jerusalem or to the Roman Empire. The Prophet had sent a messenger to Alexandria or Egypt. The Prophet had sent a messenger to Oman, which is in modern day Oman and like what's it called, and like the Arab Emirates. He had sent a messenger to Al-Yamama, which is in modern day Riyadh, and he had sent a messenger to Damascus, to an Arab tribe called the Ghasasina, which are an Arab tribe that were allied with the Romans, more or less. The Romans and the Persians, just for context, they liked having just one Arab tribe to be on their side in case they needed to deal with any issues in the Arab Empire, like in Arabia. But in general, they were just there for like proxy warfare, more or less. So let's go through them. Let's start off with Oman. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to mention the ones that I think are worth mentioning. With Oman, the Prophet had sent Amr ibn al-As, again, the most cunning of the Arabs. While Amr ibn al-As was going, keep in mind it was a long journey. If you don't know the geography of Arabia, near the southeast, there's an area called the Empty Quarter, Rub al-Khali, and you basically, there's nothing there, it's the Empty Quarter. So you need to take like a detour through like a bunch of other ways, which meant that it gave him a lot of time to think. Amr ibn al-As had been to Oman before, or he had heard about Oman before, and he knew that there were there were 2 brothers who were basically the rulers of Oman. And he understood that one of the brothers was always going to be more lenient than the other. Again, if you have a brother, or you have 2 brothers, or you have a brother yourself, you'll always know that one of them is always more lenient than the other. You'll always find that one's more harsher, and that's just natural. So while he was going, he's like, alright, if I talk to the more lenient brother, I have a better chance at getting the entire state to convert. So when he got to the city, instead of directly going to the rulers, he just spent a few days in the city. And he talked to the people, and he analyzed the behavior of the people. He realized that certain days, the people were like more chillaxed, they were happier, and others they were more on edge, less happy. And he understood that those days was when the more lenient brother ruled, and the other days, the less lenient brother ruled. So when he figured out who that brother was, and in what days he ruled, and which ones the people actually liked more, he went to him. He talked with him, and initially the brother was against the idea, but then he told him, do you not understand that the Negus had converted, and I am here because of him? And he had convinced him that there are a lot of empires that are now converting because of the Prophet ﷺ. This resonated with the brother. And keep in mind, the reason he went to the brother is because he knew that if Amr talks to the brother, again, he's talking as a traveler to him. But when the brothers talk, they're talking eye to eye. So this brother, he was convinced. He talked with his other brother. And then, because of Amr ibn al-As's cunning tactics, he was able to make the entire area convert. Going to Egypt, the Prophet had sent Hatib ibn Baltaha, I think I got his name right, and he was sent to Alexandria. Now, if you don't know history, Alexandria was ruled by the Roman Empire for like the longest time, and in Egypt there were mainly Aqbat there were Coptics. So when the messenger got to Alexandria, the main ruler of Egypt, again, it was under the rulership of the Roman Empire, but the ruler of the area was a man named Al-Muqawqis. Now, Al-Muqawqis, he listened to the message, and he actually agreed with him, and he understood that this was a prophet, and he sent a message back to the Prophet, telling him that he knows this is his message, and he agreed with it, and he had even sent him prizes, he even sent him gifts, And he sent him Maria al-Qibtiyya, which is actually one of the wife's prophets. And she was the only other woman other than Khadija radiallahu anha to give him a son, which was Ibrahim. We'll discuss Ibrahim later, inshallah. But Al-Muqawqis didn't actually embrace the religion. And the reason is because, as mentioned, he was under the influence of the Roman Empire. If you were to convert, and the area were to convert, all of his power would go. So under the influence of his power, Al-Muqawqis didn't embrace the religion. Going into Persia, and now this is where things get interesting. Let's go a few years back before even the Prophet went to Medina. In the north side, and even before the Prophet was even born, the East Roman Empire, or the Byzantines, or the Romans, I'm just going to call them, and the Sasanians, or the Persians, they've been warring for however many years. And then the Persians, in one of their battles, they were able to push the Romans all the way back to Palestine, more or less, and near Egypt. Now, keep in mind, a defeat of that scale is basically destructive for an ancient empire. So, and even like with the Prophet ﷺ, they would come to him and they would say that the people who worship fire and worship like statues like us, they beat the people who worship a holy book or a book from the sky, the Christians. And here the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Rum, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ فِي بِضْعِ سِنِينَ, which is in about 3 to 9 years. So what happened? In those 3 to 9 years that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had specified, the leader of the Caesar of the Roman Empire, his name was Heraclius. And he was in Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul, and he essentially came up with a strategy to get rid of him. Now keep in mind, ancient warfare still lasts quite a while. It's like if you look at any wars, it'll always last 20, 30, 50 years maybe. But here Heraclius, he came up with a prone strategy, and he had swore that if he was able to push the Persians out of Jerusalem and out of the Levant, he would take Jerusalem as his capital, basically moving his entire government to Jerusalem. And indeed, that's what happened. So now you have the Persians were just defeated by the Romans in basically modern day Iraq, between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and you have the Romans taking up Jerusalem. So when the Prophet ﷺ had sent Abdullah ibn Hudayfa to Persia, to Al-Madain, when he talked to the Kisra I don't know how to say it in English, Kisra of Persia, he just saw the first two statements. The Prophet ﷺ, and you can go through the letters, but he would always say, Min Muhammadun Rasulullah ila whoever, to whoever, and then he would say Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu ala man ittaba al-huda, and then he would specify, again the messages generally changed from leader to leader, but it was generally just calling them towards Islam. When he saw just the fact that the Prophet put his name above his, because he wrote from Muhammad to the king, not from the king, to the king from Muhammad, he was like, how dare he put his name above mine? Then he immediately ripped up the letter. When the Prophet saw this, he even said, مَزَقَ اللَّهُ حُكْمَهُ, or mulka, which basically means may Allah rip up his rulership. It's not the best. Again, things don't really translate well from English to Arabic, but I'm sorry, from Arabic to English, and he said, and he was so offended by this that he said, give me this man. Get me this man so I can kill him. Now, he had sent messengers to Yemen to go and pick him up. Now, you might be wondering, why is he sending messengers from Yemen? Does anybody remember why? Or does anybody know why? Again, we've talked about this before, so there should be an understanding as to why there are people from Yemen going to pick him up. Any guesses? Huh? No. But that's a reason, that's a similar reason, but there's a more primary reason where, if you remember, we talked about how Yemen was ruled by the people of Yemen, and then after the story of Ashab al-Ukhdud, the Abyssinians had actually entered into Yemen.
After the Abyssinians, when the Persians ruled Yemen?
That's what I'm about to say, exactly. So after the Abyssinians went in, the people of Yemen wanted to get rid of them, so they actually called upon the Sasanians or the Persians to come and help them. But once the Persians helped them, they just took over the land. So they had sent people from Yemen, they had told the king of Yemen to go and capture this man. So they sent 2 people from Yemen all the way to Medina, and they went to talk to the Prophet. They're like, we'll either send our army or you come with us. And the Prophet said, who sent you? He's like, the Kisra, or the ruler of Persia. He's like, he's already dead. He died 3 days ago. And they're like, how did you get that info? And it takes us at least 3 weeks to get that info. How did it come to you? He's like, go back and check. Well, they went back to Yemen, and they told the king of Yemen at the time. And now the king's waiting, and then indeed, a few days later, he finds out that the Kisra of Persia was killed by his son, and he had taken rulership over him. At this point, the rulers of Yemen had actually converted. And the entire state, subhanAllah, the Prophet sends a messenger all the way to Persia, people in Yemen convert. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in miraculous ways. And it's good to understand that that's how He works. Is that you can't put like a number on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the Romans, the final one. With the Romans, as I mentioned, Heraclius, he'd actually heard about a prophet coming. And he again, Heraclius was a scholar. He was a scholar of the Christian faith, and he knew that this was a period that a prophet was coming. And in one of the meetings, he had actually met Abu Sufyan. It's the 7th hadith of Bukhari, if I'm not mistaken. Go check it. It's a really long hadith. I'm not going to go through it. But here, when Heraclius was talking to Abu Sufyan, something in Arab tradition is that you don't lie, even if it's about your own enemies. Abu Sufyan couldn't say a single bad thing about the Prophet. He's his enemy. He couldn't say a single bad thing about him. He would ask him questions, what family is he from? Is he good amongst you? Or do the people follow him? Do the poor he couldn't say a single bad thing about him. And that just shows you when your own enemy can't think of a single bad thing to say about you. And I can tell you bad things about my own friends, let alone my enemies. But here Abu Sufyan can't even say a single bad thing about his own enemy. So when Heraclius got the message, he knew it was true. And it actually resonated with him. And when he came to announce his Islam, he wanted to check something. His cabinet was full of also like Christian priests. So when he came, he brought his cabinet into a room, and then he locked that room, and then he went above them, and he said, he asked them about the messenger that's coming. And then once they had said, yes, there's a messenger, so on and so forth, he showed them the message of the Prophet. And then Heraclius, the king of the Roman Empire, of the East Roman Empire, he says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. At this point, the priest and his cabinet, they all got up and they rushed towards the door and they were trying to leave. And then he asked them, is this not something you guys believe in? You just said, that's true. But they said we would never leave our own religion and we would never follow a different faith than that. Now here, Heraclius knew something. He knew that if he doesn't even have the support of his own cabinet, he definitely doesn't have the support of his empire. So now he has one of 2 options. The message, his empire. The message, the Roman Empire. At which point Heraclius came and he said, I was testing you guys. I wanted to see if you guys were following your faith. Now, Heraclius and Al-Muqawqis, they didn't embrace the religion because they had some of the biggest empires in the entire world.
If he locked the room, right, this was a private meeting, how do you know this?
Because it was narrated by the people, it's no. I'll check, but that's a good story.
Because either someone from that meeting had to tell him.
It's possible. I'll check. It's because we definitely. It might have been told to the Prophet too, because I'll mention what the Prophet said about Heraclius in a second. But I'm actually not sure. I'll have to double check on that. Actually, but I know it is in the sources that I've used. I'll double check. Huh? Inshallah. So with Heraclius, sorry, where was it? Oh yeah, Al-Muqawqis and Heraclius, they gave up the religion for 2 of the biggest empires in the world, which again is not a good deal because you're giving up Jannah. But what are we giving up the world for? And if somebody, and if I give up my religion now, or I even compromise it, what am I compromising it for? He compromised it for the rulership of the biggest empire in the entire world. What do you have that's even worth that? It's even close to that. And that wasn't worth it. So whatever you're gonna give up, it's not even gonna come close. And that's a good thing to reflect on, because if you have everything, and again, Heraclius has everything. It's worth giving that up away for the message. So whatever you have, which I promise you is not even close to this, it's not worth it. And when Heraclius came to the messenger, Dihan al-Kalbi, he told him, tell the Prophet, and I believe in his message, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. And then when the Prophet, and he sent him a few gifts, but when the Prophet got this, he cursed him. And he said, Kadhab. I forgot what he named it, but he said that he's a liar. But question, the Negus didn't announce his religion. And the Prophet, he even prayed on him. When the Negus died, the Najashi died, the Prophet prayed to him. He prayed his janazah. So how is the Negus any different than Heraclius? And we're about to see that in a second. One more thing to mention is that once the message started spreading, remember what the Prophet had told the people who went to Al-Habasha, who went to Abyssinia. He told them, once you start hearing about me, come to where I am. So once they started hearing this, the people of Abyssinia, specifically Ja'far ibn Abi Talib as their head, started heading to Medina. And when Ja'far came, the Prophet was so happy, because Ja'far is very close to the Prophet. Now, we're gonna come to the last interesting thing before we talk about Quraysh again, which was the expedition of Mu'tah, or Sariyat Mu'tah. Now, one of the people that the Prophet had sent a messenger to was Al-Ghasasina. It's an Arab tribe which is basically allied with the Romans. When the Prophet had sent the messenger to them, they denied, they found it highly offensive, and they didn't accept it. And then the Prophet had sent another messenger to a completely different tribe, which was Umayr al-Zadi. And while he was going to Basra to give them the message, Al-Ghasasina, they found him and they killed him. Okay, now you're killing messengers. Now we've drawn a line. So the Prophet mobilized an army which is so far going to be the biggest army that the Muslims have gathered. An army of 3,000 men. And the Prophet has said, the leader of this army is Zayd ibn Haritha. What did we say? Who is Zayd ibn Haritha? Come on. He had a term. Habib Rasulullah. The quote-unquote adopted son of the Prophet, until adoption was made prohibited. People called him Zayd ibn Muhammad. The only of one of the companions who has his name mentioned in the Quran, by name. And then, after, if something happens to him, it's Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and if it's not him, Abdullah ibn Rawaha. So they went to fight the Ghassan army, and keep in mind, in that army was Khalid ibn al-Walid. But Khalid wasn't even put on that list, and he wasn't even put, the Prophet didn't even put him as a list of people who would, the Prophet put a few other names after him, but he wasn't even part of that list. And Khalid ibn al-Walid, again, he could have came, I'm the cavalry commander of Medina, Mecca, he's like, whatever you want me to be, I'll be. You want me to be a ground soldier, I'll be that. You want me to be a general, I'll be that. Whatever you want. He went. He was excited to go, and this is his first battle with the Muslims. Now, they went to an area it's in Jordan right now, near the Dead Sea. It's called Mu'tah. And when they got there, they found out that they're now in front of an army of 200,000 Roman and Ghassan soldiers. 200,000 is generally what's agreed on, but if you go with the lower estimate of some historians, it's 1,300. Sorry, it's 130,000. That's the lowest estimate, that's the highest estimate. Either way, you're at least fighting an army that is 10 times your size. At least. So, when they got there, now they're discussing, there's no way we're defeating 200,000. But some of the people in the army were in Badr. They said winning isn't by numbers. We've seen that. And that's why, by the way, the people of Badr are the most honored. Because they didn't guarantee any victories. And they didn't understand this. But now people do. That's why this expedition isn't at the same scale of Badr, even though Badr was Again, it's 300 against 900 at least. So they agreed, none of them, not a single person in the army wanted to go back. They all agreed we're either gonna wait for backup or we're gonna go fight. And they went with the latter. What they did is that Zayd ibn Haritha, he said, okay, the only way we're gonna win this is by being the aggressors. So what he did is he put themselves between two mountains. He made sure that the enemy army was placed between two mountains. That way they're funneled in. They're not fighting the 200,000 at the same time, they're basically being funneled in and they're able to attack them. And then Zayd ibn Haritha, every single day, he would wake up at Fajr, he would gather the army, and they would go attack. So every single day, also one more thing to note here. The Romans here, if we talk about Heraclius embracing the message, but when the Ghassan army came and he told them that the Muslims are coming to fight us, give us troops, he came and gave them to them. If he was actually, at least in Najashi, we talked about how Najashi had actually protected the Muslims against his own people. Here Heraclius couldn't even do that. So here, Zayd ibn Haritha every single day, for 5 days, he would go right after Fajr and he would attack the army. He would attack them. And the Romans, to them, they can't comprehend what's happening. They're always waking up and they're always finding themselves under attack. And they're always on the defensive, even though they have a massive army. So day after day, after 5 days, on the 6th day, the Roman commander, he had enough. He's like, no, tomorrow I'm the one who's fighting. So here, the Roman general, he woke them up early, and he's like, go fight them. So now, the 200,000 Roman army is now going through that funnel, and they're trying to attack us. And here the Muslim line started to break. Again, it's a massive army, and Zayd ibn Haritha, he took he had the flag more or less, and he's fighting with it. And at this point, the Prophet, all the way in Medina, he said, "As-salatu jami'ah, everybody come." And the Prophet started describing word for word what was happening at Mu'tah. The Prophet is all the way here, Mu'tah is all the way there. Miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But as they were fighting, the Prophet describing it, and he said, Zayd ibn Haritha had the flag, he has the flag and he's fighting. Zayd ibn Haritha died. My Habib Rasulullah has died. And the Prophet seeing that live, more or less. And then he says, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, somebody who's so close to me, one of my relatives, he's taken the flag, but his right arm got cut off. So he took it with his left. So his left arm got cut off. So he, with what he has left, he grabbed that and he tried to hug the flag, and then they split him in half. And then the Prophet says that Abdullah ibn Rawaha took the flag. And by the way, in regards to Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has replaced his arms with wings. He's able to fly over in Jannah. May Allah makes part with him, inshallah. With Abdullah ibn Rawaha actually hesitated a bit. And actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet said that Abdullah ibn Rawaha is actually a tier lower than Zayd and Ja'far because he hesitated. But then he asked himself, why does my soul why does my soul fear dying? And then Ja'far went, Abdullah went, and he died. Now, here the Muslims, the flag bearer is down, the Muslim line started to separate. And at this point, an ace is pulled out of the Muslims' sleeve. When the Muslims remembered what happened at Badr, and they saw their lines breaking up, 2 men came and they went to grab the flag. Oh, actually, they went to grab the banner. So it was Thabit ibn al-Arqam and Khalid ibn al-Walid. Thabit ibn al-Arqam is actually part of that list that the Prophet had put in terms of commanders, and he was part of Badr. But here, Thabit was old, and he knew this. And he knew that Khalid ibn al-Walid was a cavalry commander for Quraysh. He's much more experienced than me. He knows a lot more, and he's younger. So he went to Khalid, he gave him the banner. He's like, lead. But you have rulership over me. He's like, I am an old man. You are the cavalry commander of Quraysh, lead. Khalid, he took the flag, he gathered the army, they fought them for the 6th day, and once night fell, they came back. And here, we see the first of many geniuses of Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid, keep in mind, for this army, so far Arab warfare has just been take some horses, take some men, take some bowmen, stop. But here they knew they couldn't do that. So they had actually separated their army into a right wing, into a left wing, front and back. So Khalid, and again, these were all constant. So Khalid thought about it and he said, okay, there's no way we're defeating an army of 200,000. There's just no way. We gotta retreat. So how are we gonna retreat? He thought about it. He's like, all right. He told some of his cavalry to go towards Medina's direction. He told them in groups on the next day during this time, start making go in circles, so you make like a smoke screen, like a smoke cloud, and then come in drives, go group by group. And then he went to his army. He's like, everybody change clothes. Just change clothes with whoever's next to you. And then once he did that, he also changed the banner of the flags that they had. And then he told the right flank to go into the left flank. He told the left flank to go into the right flank. He told the back to come to the front and the front to come to the back. Basically, same army, but just restructured. So what happened? Now imagine as a Roman, you come in, you wake up, there's basically, because you don't recognize the faces, but there's a new army, and anybody who's fighting on the right flank sees somebody who's new, anybody on the left flank, so they just assume it's a new army. They assume backup has come. And then Khalid, again remember he wants to retreat, but then on the 7th day, on the final day, he tells his army, before they go, to fight as viciously as they can fight, and then he tells them all to go in. Into the Roman army, not back, no, into them. And subhanAllah, also a miracle of Allah, there was also like a dust storm during that time. So as these cavalry are now coming in droves, the Roman army, they saw backup is coming. So at this point, Khalid and the entire army are fighting. Khalid said that he broke 9 swords on the heads of people during that day. And and the Prophet ﷺ said, when he got that banner initially, he said, and now the banner is picked up by one of the swords of Allah. The flag was taken by a sword amongst the swords of Allah. And that's where his popular name comes from. Sayfullah, or the sword of Allah. And the army, they're fighting valiantly in the middle, right? But again, you might be asking me, I thought he was meant to retreat. Why is he fighting? When an army retreats, historically and statistically, you lose about 70% of your army. If Khalid retreats, his army is dead. And the Muslims are done. So he needed to figure out a way to retreat without having that loss. So when he went in, and the Romans, they don't know how many Muslims there are right now. They're just fighting whoever's in front of them. While they were at the climax of their battle, Khalid ibn Walid starts screaming out and he says, everybody retreat. And the entire army falls towards Medina. Now the Roman commander, they were winning, by the way, so they're fighting valiantly and they're winning. But you realize, an army who's winning wouldn't retreat unless they're trying to deceive us into a trap. So he told his army to stay still, don't follow them. Which allowed the Muslims and gave them space to get all the way back to Medina. Genius. It's a military strategy still studied till today, by the way. And then once they got to Medina, now keep in mind this was the first time the Muslims have ever retreated. And as the army came in, the people of Medina, they actually started stoning them. They were like, why did you leave? And did you leave out of fear of death? Even one man, he came to his house and his wife wouldn't even let him into the house. He's like, woman, I just came out of a battle. Help me. And once they got there, the Prophet, he smiled at them. And he said the Muslims wouldn't fall back except in one of 2 cases. Unless they're coming up with a new strategy which requires them to retreat, or they're falling back to somebody to support them, and I am the support for every Muslim. Rasulullah. And the Battle of Mu'tah showed us how strong the Muslims can be, and it showed us how valiant they can be. And it also showed us the significance of Badr. In Badr, the Muslims, they didn't know any of this. They didn't know that they'd have support from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't understand this. And that's why when the people of Badr, finally finished battling, once they were done, the Prophet came to them and he said, "If'alu ma shi'tum qad ghafara Allahu lakum." Do whatever you want, Allah has forgiven all of your sins. Whatever you do. It's because the people who fought at Badr, they actually went because of who they are. يعني احنا we're talking about Bilal, Abu Bakr, Umar. يعني whenever we're going into something or we're ever going through a struggle right now, we already know the cheat code. We already know that we're like successful. So it's not worth thinking about too much. It's not worth having anxiety over something that you already know Allah's gonna make you successful over. Maybe not the way you think you're gonna be successful. But khalas, Allah's already written it for you. And here the Muslims, they've gone into a new era. Their army's powerful, the message is being spread all over, new empires are embracing their religion, different tribes are embracing their religion. And overall, everything's going well. Trade's going well, the Muslim traders are becoming very wealthy, people are coming, So here we realize that the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and even Umar ibn Khattab agreed to this. He said, after this I will never, I've seen that the Prophet knows more than me. The Prophet made a treaty which, remember, the Muslim thought it was pathetic. Why? What's the wisdom behind this? We're losing more than we're gaining in terms of the treaty itself, but look how much they gain. When you just agree to something that the Prophet ﷺ and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ has put, something's going to happen after. You don't know what it is, but just trust the process. Our religion is the definition of trust the process, and Sulh al-Hudaybiyah is the definition of trust the process, and this is the consequence of the process. But ironically enough, this treaty actually didn't last, because yes, while the Muslims and Quraysh had benefited from it, as I had mentioned, and Quraysh too had benefited from it, but not as much as the Muslims. But remember what was the second? I think it was the second. What was the second part of the treaty that they agreed to? Anyone who wanted to join Quraysh's side or the Muslim side in terms of the treaty can. Quraysh took Banu Bakr, the Muslims took Khuza'ah. Now, something to mention is that Banu Bakr and Khuza'ah already had beef from before during times of Jahiliyyah, during the period of Jahiliyyah. What was their beef about? Wallahi, I couldn't tell you. Probably some dude made fun of some other dude's like wife or mother or something. Some dude killed a dude's camel. I swear to God, these are actually reasons people have fought over in pre-Islamic Arabia. He dropped a diss track on him with a poem. Anything. And it's the Arabs fought over anything and everything. So they had some beef. I couldn't tell you what it was. But and Khuza'ah, they were actually now becoming, they felt safer because of the treaty, and the Muslims are doing very well, alhamdulillah, and they don't need to worry about Bani Bakr. So they were even going through in and out of Medina. Now when Bani Bakr saw this, they were kind of offended by it. So at one point, they actually talked to a few chiefs in Mecca, and they told them that they can go and fight Khuza'ah for whatever reason. At which point, in a place called Al-Watir, Banu Bakr went and killed a group of people from Khuza'ah, breaking the agreement. When the Prophet was told of this, he got really mad. He said the treaty between us and Quraysh has been nullified. So what's the Prophet gonna do with Quraysh? How is he gonna get revenge for the people from Khuza'ah? Come next time, inshallah. So as mentioned, inshallah, by the way, I'm pretty sure we have, one question. Is this time good with you guys, or do you guys want it a bit earlier? Do you think earlier is better, or this time is fine? Fine? Okay. It's fine with me. These are references, as mentioned. So for instance, if you want to check, by the way, enter the story about, what's it called? About Heraclius. It was mentioned by Tariq Suwidan. So that's what I'll reference for you, but if you want to check it out, I'll check it out. And the Sealed Nectar also has a lot of sources, so we can check that too, bi'idhnillah. And for your Quranic references, and since Ramadan is coming up, I'd highly recommend you go through these. They're not a lot, because we don't actually have a lot of verses in regards to a lot of these things. But Surah Al-Fath, we mentioned it last time, but I recommend you do it again, but now do it from start to end. Because Surah Al-Fath talks about all of the things that the Muslims gained from the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Ali Imran actually has a verse, I forgot, كلمة بيننا وبينكم. I don't remember the full verse, but that's the verse that the Prophet ﷺ always referenced in the letter that he used to give to the kings. And Surah Al-Rum gives you more context in regards to what happened with the Romans. With that in mind, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. سبحانك اللهم عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
And then turn off the video.